Hola amigos, soy la profesora Jacob and this is Español 2, módulo 1, mi rutina. So in this video, we're going to learn how to write a comparative description for 1.04. So as of now, you should be able to introduce yourself using the word llamar, use the verb tener to describe your age, use time expressions, use regular, irregular, all sorts of verbs in the present tense. Compare and contrast your routine to someone else's, and use the vocabulary from this module so far. So in this writing task, use the previous sample, which is Kayla's story, as a guide, but use your own words different from her sample in your composition. Important reminders are to watch this video and the rest of it for instructions. Do all of your work directly on Canvas. What that means is do not use Google Docs, do not use Microsoft Docs or any other writing platform, Apple Pages, any of that. And naturally, we know this, but do not use online translators or AI to help you with your work. So in this particular assignment, you're going to imagine you're an exchange student and today is your first day of school in a new country. You notice that your schedule has fewer classes than you do back home in the States. You think this is a mistake, so you ask your teacher, Senor Martinez. Your question sparks an interesting conversation with the entire class, and it turns out not everyone in the class has the same number of classes or the same daily routines. So the step one is going to be to choose a friend to compare with. So your mission is to write a rough draft meaning there is expected to be mistakes. It's raw, it's rough, for una descripción comparativa about your routine and the routine of a new friend from a Spanish-speaking country in Spanish. First, we must choose our friend. Here we have Sofia, Edgar, and Jorge. So you're going to compare and contrast your daily routine with that of one of these three. On the quiz, you will see this page where Sofia, Edgar, and Jorge talk about themselves, and in English, it has a list of their routine. Use this to compare, use vocabulary from the lesson, use your own routine to compare with theirs. It could be similarities or it could be differences. Then we have the requirements. Feel free to pause anywhere along this video if you need to take a look at this page or any of the other pages. So we have the requirements and what to include. Things like name, age, where you live, time you wake up, etc. And then in the hints, it's not only the content we need to include, but what vocabulary, what verbs, what grammar skills from this module so far that need to be in this assignment. This is what I'm really assessing, is how you're able to use and apply the information and the skills you've learned so far into this assignment. So let's see if we can go one by one. The first is your name and age. We're going to review this really briefly and quickly, seeing as how this should have been learned in the module, and this will just be a review on how to apply it. So with that, we use the verb tener for the age. Example. Hola, ¿cómo te llamas? Buenas, me llamo Alberto. ¿Y tú? Introducciones. So there are three ways of introducing oneself. The reality is that me llamo, which is the first option, is the most common in most Spanish-speaking countries. Naturally, all three of those can be used, but that isn't it, and at least good to know that me llamo is the most common. So next example is ¿cuántos años tienes? Alberto says, tengo 17 años. ¿Y tú? Notice we use the verb tengo. It stems from the verb tener. When we describe our age, we use the verb tener, which means to have. Interesting how in English the question becomes, how old are you? I am 16 years old. Even though you're young, you're already applying that you are old as you're getting older. In Spanish, on the other hand, we ask, how many years do you have? I have 16 years, which is why we use the verb tener. Here is a conjugation chart to show how this verb changes. This verb is irregular. Irregular in two ways. The first, because it's a stem changing verb. The E changes to an IE, so the I appears. And the second irregularity, it's a yo-go verb. So in the yo form, a G appears. So in this actividad, you will start with your name and age. ¿Cómo te llamas y cuántos años tienes tú? The second requirement is where you live. So in this case, the verb vivir is going to be very important because that means to live. Example, Mucho gusto, Alberto. ¿Dónde vives? Mi familia vive en Texas, pero yo vivo en Valencia. So if you notice here, we have a chart for regular verbs in the present tense. Regular verbs, because right now we're only going to look at the endings, so how to conjugate regular verbs. Hopefully you are quite familiar with this verb chart, especially from Spanish 1, so we won't spend a lot of time in there. The important thing to know is that the verb for to live, hopefully you remember, is vivir. It is an IR verb, so where would you land this verb if you're talking about yourself? Número 3, the time you wake up. So this is where you can include a time expression. Let's use an example. ¿A qué hora te duermes? Normalmente me duermo a las 10 de la noche, pero los viernes y sábados me duermo a las 11. So notice the response was a las and then the time. In Spanish, a la refers to at 1, a la 1, a las 3. Do you notice the difference between a la and a las? Hopefully you notice that the second one is plural. Anything that's beyond 1 o'clock, even 1:55, you're still in the singular hour zone. Then it becomes plural for a las 10, a las 8, anything above 1. More information to be more specific in the time of day, you have de la mañana, in the morning, de la tarde, in the afternoon, and de la noche, in the evening. Here is some more vocabulary if you want to be specific for time and day. Número 4, include the activities you do first and second in the morning before school. So in this case, you can use any kind of verbs, regular, stem changing, irregular, reflexive verbs in the present tense. The reflexive verbs are going to be key in this part of your assignment because these are going to be routine activities. And these routine activities that are performed in the day are things that one does to oneself. Let's look at some examples. Yo me levanto a las 8 de la mañana. Tú te lavas el pelo con una vez a la semana. Mi hermana se cepilla los dientes primero. Mis amigos y yo nos vestimos con un uniforme. Los jugadores de golf se duermen temprano. I'm hoping all of these words look familiar to you, and if they don't, I encourage you to go back and review your vocabulary, check the Quizlet sets to help you. So to wake up. How do we say to wake up? The verb is despertarse. Now, despertarse is unique in two ways because it also is a stem-changing verb and it is reflexive. Let's look at how this works. Number 1, the stem change is the E turns into an IE. So keep that in mind. The second irregularity is a reflexive, and this isn't irregular, it just defines the kind of verb it is, because that se at the end tells us that it is a reflexive pronoun that changes and goes before the conjugated verb pronouns. And this expresses that the person doing the action is also the receiver of the action. So you wake yourself up. Finally, you want to conjugate that ending. And in this case, the ending is the AR-ER-IR ending is going to conjugate like normal. Despertarse is an AR verb, so consider that as you conjugate. We're going to go back and look at the verb dormirse, to sleep, and see how this one changed. This too has stem change, and it is a reflexive verb. So, me duermo. The reflexive pronoun is the me because I am the one sleeping, and I'm doing the action, and I'm receiving it. Te duermes for you sleep yourself. Se duerme for él or ella or usted. Nosotros nos dormimos. And ellos, ellas, or ustedes se duermen. Notice the O in this case changes to a UE, but the endings conjugate normal for the IR verbs. In this case, he's talking about himself, so he says, yo me duermo. Here are some examples of routine actions. If you notice, the se at the end implies they're reflexive. So you would need to use this pattern we just looked at with that pronoun before the verb. These words in blue are stem-changing verbs as well, so take that into consideration as you're conjugating your verbs. Number 5 is the hygiene products you use. So look at your vocabulary. Here is a list of different hygiene products you can use. All right. Número 6, a similarity or difference between your routine and your new friend's routine. So, important, you can use the reflexive, any one of these verbs. I encourage you to use the reflexive verbs. Stem changing, irregular, irregular, but the reflexive really focus on those daily routines. And compare or contrast, they could be similar or they could be different. Now, if we go back to look at the difference between Kayla and Luciana's routine, she, talking about herself, says, me despierto a las 6 de la mañana, whereas her amiga Luciana se despierta a las 7. Kayla says, me cepillo los dientes. Her friend se lava la cara. Kayla says, me lavo las manos, whereas her friend se lava el pelo. Now, notice the differences between the yo and the ella form. Now, although these are the examples, try to use your own verbs, your own action words that are different from this to show your understanding. All right, and also to demonstrate that you're able to include the words and the hygiene products that you want, and make sure that they're not identical to this because they can fall under the term plagiarism. So make sure you stay away from that. Ask me any questions if you have any questions as to what that means or whether it does not fall within that. Finally, número 7, use the vocabulary from the lessons. I'm stressing that because that is what I am trying to assess. Did you learn it? Are you able to apply it? Can you show me that you understand it? Here is a list of vocabulary. We have 01.01 about las partes del cuerpo. 01.02, this one talks about the daily routine words. And número 3 is ¿a qué hora te despiertas? This has to do with times, adverbs, hygiene products, etc. So the vocabulary will also be in this quiz. You can refer to that if you need to. So finally, we do have the rubric. Make sure that you review it. Here is the rubric. It will also be in this quiz, so take a look at that. And if you have any questions, let me know. As always, please set up a meeting if you'd like some support, if you'd like me to just sit there and be there to guide or to just support if you have any questions along the way. Happy to do that, work with you as you complete this assignment. All right, amigos, mucha suerte, lots of luck, el fin.